JavaScript hoisting. Hoisting is the mechanism wherein a function declaration or var variable declaration is moved to the top of its scope even before the variable is initialized. What does this mean? What does this look like? Let's have a quick look at declaration versus initialization. Here, we are just declaring a variable called email. No initialization. Here we are declaring a variable called name and initializing it later. And here we are declaring and initializing a variable all at the same time. So, hoisting var variables, specifically var variables, this does not apply to let or const. We are also using useStrict so that whenever we try to use a variable that doesn't exist, we will get a reference exception instead of it simply assuming the variable is undefined. So, first up, we are trying to console log a variable called age and name. And even though we have useStrict on, we get an undefined and undefined. So the variables must exist. Down here, we are initializing a variable called age to 5. Then we are console logging again. And now it says 5. So the variable is now initialized, but it doesn't appear to have been declared yet. I mean, there's not much code here to see, but you can see down here, now the variable has been declared, and we are declaring and initializing a variable called name. When we call it a third time, we get both our variables. If we were to delete this line, var age, and try to run this code again, we would get a reference exception. Well, a reference error, sorry. Even though it looks like it should all just work and we are declaring it after we're initializing it. That's because of hoisting. The variable declaration has been moved to the top of the scope, so the code doesn't complain, we just have an undefined variable, but a variable that exists. How does this work for functions? Do functions work the same? In this case, again, we are using strict to make sure that if we are using it incorrectly, we will get reference errors. We are trying to console log a function called displayFunc. And when you try to log a function or toString a function, we get the full source code, the original source code for the function. And we get all the source code, which you can see is highlighted in two places because the function is actually declared and initialized down here. But it's declared and initialized and available back up for the console log. That's because functions, when defined with the function keyword, will be declared and initialized at the top of their scope. We have another function here called displayVar, which is a variable that then equals a function, but it hasn't been declared with the function keyword. I mean, there is function here, but we're making an anonymous function in this case for this part. But the variable is declared down here. So it exists, it's been hoisted, but the actual value is not initialized until we get down here. As we can see by this console log, where we log it again, it was undefined, it now comes up with the function's source. So subtle difference that functions do get declared and initialized at the top of their scope. And one more small thing about scoping is, despite them being moved to the top of their scope, they are not moved outside of their scope. So if you have a function called main, that inside is calling a function called showHelp, that showHelp function just displays the word help. We can call main, we get the output help. If we try to call showHelp, we get a reference error because that showHelp doesn't exist in this scope. It exists within the scope of this main function. Sometimes hoisting is described as the declaration gets moved to the top of the file, which is a subtle but important difference that it doesn't get moved to the top of the file, it gets moved to the top of the scope. Anyway, that's hoisting.